Warning. This episode of the Atheist Manifesto contains hidden subliminal messages. Listening to the following episode may actually brainwash you into being queer and or trans. Thanks to Aaron, Gareth, and Candace pledging at patreon.com/theatheistmanifesto, we were able to hire some of the foremost minds in PsyOps to help us turn you all queer. Mwahahahaha. So if you want to help us turn the world gay, head over to patreon.com/theatheistmanifesto and consider a per episode donation to support the show. Your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I'm a little bit sad today.
Aw, what's going on?
I don't get to eat Korean food every day, so I'm sad.
That's legit. Like, I don't even have a response to that except for love and affirmation, my friend. I am standing in solidarity with you.
Yeah, it was me and Zachary's anniversary yesterday, and we went to a Korean restaurant.
Aww.
It was so delicious and great. And then there was actually a Korean grocery store right next to it. So then we went in there and bought like snacks and tea and stuff. It's so happy. And now all my money's gone. Bye, money.
Yeah, that'll happen. Well, I'm glad you got that experience, and I'm sad that you don't get to experience it every day. And
yeah, I got to have the leftovers of the dinner for lunch. So that was pretty good. I had fish ball soup.
That sounds really interesting.
It was fish roe soup, technically, but I like to say it was fish balls.
All right.
BAWLZ.
Right, of course, because that's the only right way to do it.
Balls.
So, one quick announcement before we get started. I'm sure many of you will remember the other podcast that I spent a whole bunch of time talking up, released 5 episodes of, and then had to take off the internet because I had to change the name. Well, it's back. The show's new name is The Queer Side, and it is up on iTunes and pretty much everywhere else you can find podcasts right now. I don't think it's posted to Google Play or Stitcher yet, but it should be everywhere else. And Google Play and Stitcher are in the works. And the first episode, the re-debut episode, is a story from the one and only Token Envy, your friend and mine, Ari Stillman.
It's a really hilarious story full of laughter and fun times.
Oh, God. No,
it's not.
Major trigger warning for the story.
I was listening to it today after it was released, and I was like, wow, I say I don't remember what happened like 50% of the time in this interview.
So, we're like 2.5 minutes into the recording, and I haven't actually said what this episode's going to be about yet.
You'll find out when we get to it. Just be patient.
Here's the thing. It's been a long time since I've been nervous to record an episode of the Atheist Manifesto, but I'm pretty nervous to record this one, to be completely honest. I think it was Thursday, actually, and this is not a completely new phenomenon, but it was something that was really on my mind Thursday. And I'm just going to come right out and say it. I am not entirely sure anymore that I am totally a binary trans person. I'm not ready to take on the label of non-binary. I'm not ready.
Not making any commitments yet.
Right? Yeah. I'm not asking anybody to change pronouns or anything like that yet. I don't know exactly where I'm at. But let me just lay this out. So, over, I don't know, the last year or so, I've had a couple experiences where I'm talking to someone, and in an effort to not gender me, they will use the pronoun they provisionally until I say, I use she, her. And so a person will refer to me as they, and I'm like, ooh, that actually kind of feels good. And when I would find myself being referred to as, well, this person, as opposed to this woman or this trans woman or anything else like that, I'm like, gosh, that kind of fits comfortably. And I've felt so little pressure to conform to feminine stereotypes lately. And And the last thing in particular, obviously that is not, you can fit all the feminine stereotypes and still be a non-binary person. But for me, I had kind of set myself into, I am a very stereotypically feminine trans woman. Like, I like painting my nails. I like dresses. I like long and pretty hair done up. And I used to wear makeup every day. And I'm like super emotionally sensitive. And like, just list off all of the woman stereotypes. And I fit most of them. And that's all fine. But lately it's felt like it's not been quite as good a fit as I used to feel like it has. And I have a couple of theories. The first being, I've had my bottom surgery now, and I would like on a scale of 0 to 100, I'm probably like 70 or 75% comfortable in my body now. And so that's not a constant worry for me. I'm not constantly thinking about like, oh my God, I hate the way my body is arranged and I have to do this thing to fix it. And so I'm just less preoccupied by that. And so now I can kind of move on to more heady things like, oh, okay, Callie, who the hell actually are you? And it's the silliest things because, again, some of it's just stereotype stuff. I went shoe shopping the other day and I went and like, my feet, if I happen to be a cis guy, my feet are pretty mid-sized, but in women's sizes, my feet are pretty big, right? And I didn't see anything in the women's that appealed to me. And they had like literally 4 pairs of shoes that were in my size. So I just strolled over to the men's section. I was like, yeah, I'll see what they have here. And it took me a second. I'm like, wow, that's really weird because there's this thing that a lot of trans women experience where there's this extreme pressure to perform femininity, right? So I have to buy women's razors. I have to buy the pink thing. I have to wear women's clothing. I have to wear women's shoes, and I have to do women's accessories because if I don't do everything the society women's way, then I'm not really valid and people won't accept me as such, right? And I felt that pressure hard early on. But most of that stuff is stuff that I was okay with anyways. Like I like makeup, I like dresses, I like the women's stuff, aside from like, the pink razor that's $2 more and literally the exact same thing as the men's razor. Like that I'm obviously not okay with, but I did it anyways, right? Because I'm going through the checkout line and I'm thinking like, I'm going to get the side eye from the cashier, and it's silly stuff, but that's the pressure that a lot of people get put under, right? And it's this idea like, I don't want to stick out, right? I want to blend in. I want to be just another person in the grocery store, another person in the mall shopping or having fun with my friends. I don't want to stick out. So I have to fit all of these boxes, right? And for the longest time, I was like, it sucks that that's a thing. But lucky for me, most of those boxes are things I'm comfortable with anyways. So it's not something that's actually causing harm to me. And the more I move on, the more comfortable I get in who I am, the more comfortable I get in my body. There are some of those boxes that just don't feel like they fit anymore. And I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, this is a very complicated issue, right? And obviously, and I am of 2 very split minds on this type of thing. One is that I'm not really sure that gender is even a real thing. But that's probably because of my personal experience not really getting this whole gender thing. And I'm probably putting that on other people like, oh, it's probably not really a thing for them either. But it probably is because, of course, I hear all the stories about, binary trans people and even non-binary trans people who have severe dysphoria. And I'm like, I can't say that that's not real. Like, there's a reason why you feel that way. But when I think about what makes me non-binary, and I've been asked this on interviews on several different podcasts, what does it mean to me to be non-binary? And I don't know. Like, I really don't have an answer. I don't know what it means because my gender isn't based on the I don't know. It's not based on the colors that I like or the clothes that I like to wear or the roles that I fit into. Like, even if I were totally stereotypically feminine, I could still be non-binary. Even if I were totally stereotypically masculine, I could still be non-binary. So it's not that I I act androgynous, that necessarily makes me non-binary, although that is a part of my gender experience personally. But I'm just thinking, like, if gender is not your genitals, if gender is not your gender roles, if gender is not your presentation, what is gender? I don't know what it is.
Right. Like, and that's exactly, my line of thinking is like, so part of what's coming up in my head is that all of these stereotypically feminine things are starting to not fit for me. And it's like, that shouldn't be a thing that determines my identity, because even if they still fit, I could still be a non-binary person. So what the hell does that even mean?
The only thing I know is that when people call me Ari, which is a gender neutral name, I feel better than when they call me a feminine name. Or when I think about maybe if they called me a masculine name, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. When people use they pronouns for me, I just feel better than when they use she or he pronouns. And I don't know why. I just do.
Right. And knowing what we know about identities and how we feel, like, that should be enough, right? But, like, for me, it's not. Like, I have to understand this. Like, what is this? And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and something that they told me has really stuck with me. And the phrase was, "Gender is an illusion, but dysphoria is real."
That is awesome. I have a friend who says gender is a hoax, and I'm like, you're my favorite.
Right. And obviously that's not to invalidate people who are binary or who have a very a distinct experience of gender, right? That's not to invalidate people. But I think it speaks to the idea that it is a completely subjective experience. And I think that's what makes it so hard for some people to wrap their heads around, right? Because for most things, even if it's not an experience another person shares, I feel like for most things, I might be able to explain it in a way that there's at least some level of understanding there. And I've even had this when people ask me, like, okay, so what is it that makes you identify as a woman, right? Even as a binary trans person, or a person who was at least certain for some period of time that I was one, people would say, okay, like, I 100% accept everything that you're telling me, and I'm going to use the pronouns that you want, and I respect you for who you are, but, like, I just want to know, what is it about you that makes you feel more like a woman than a man? And I'm like, for me, the only answer that I had was that all of the things, or most of the things that I associate with femininity are things that I identify with, that in combination with my body dysphoria, it just puts me on that side of the equation, right? But there are binary trans women who are very masculine and who don't have that kind of dysphoria. Maybe their dysphoria is completely social, and yet they feel comfortable saying, well, I'm a binary trans woman. So, like, again, I don't know what to do with this.
I don't either. The only thing that gives me pause about this is that I have seen this with a lot of different people who identify as binary, that sometimes they will go through periods where they're like, well, I don't fit all the stereotypical whatever gender it is that I've been identifying as. Like, if it's a trans woman who doesn't like to wear makeup and likes to wear sweatpants and play video games, then she's like, oh, maybe, I do still have some masculine qualities, because of course everyone has some masculine qualities, and what even is a masculine quality? I don't know. But but they're like, oh, maybe I'm non-binary because I don't fit these stereotypes of what a woman is. And, I've seen this with several of my friends that will go through a period of kind of thinking, maybe I'm non-binary, I don't know. And then inevitably they're like, no, what was I even thinking? Of course I'm a woman. So, and I don't know, maybe just, it feels a little bit appropriative. I hate to use that, but, when people
that's
are like,
literally what I was about to say.
Yeah. I know being non-binary is really cool and special and whatever, but, like, not everybody is. And
yeah, your automatic ticket to Cool Town.
Yeah. And I've had this experience so many times, especially when I was first researching what does genderqueer mean. When I first heard that term, I would go on YouTube and search, for people talking about their experience of being genderqueer, and I'd find a video and I'd watch it and I'd be like, yeah, I totally identify with what this person is saying. Then I'd go on their channel and look at their more recent videos, and 9 times out of 10, they had since I started identifying as binary. And so I'm thinking, like, is non-binary even a real thing? Like, is this just a phase where I'm just kind of like experimenting with myself and I'm really on the way to masculinity? And it was really hard for me to find somebody out there whose non-binary identity was stable. And that's a lot more common to find now. This was several years ago, back when, this was first becoming a thing on YouTube. So, yeah, I just kind of worry that people, whenever they feel that they don't fit into these stereotypes of what a man or a woman is, they start thinking, well, maybe that means I'm not a man or a woman. And it's kind of buying into and giving those stereotypes power. Mm-hmm. So don't do that, Callie.
You have my sincerest promise that I will not label myself based on gender stereotypes alone. And that was another thought that I had, right? Because you brought up the idea that it feels a little bit appropriative, and that's a worry that I have because in my head I'm thinking, okay, so I have, aside from the fact that I'm not literally rich, I've kind of reach the apex of privilege that a trans person can get, right? Like, I've had bottom surgery. I have loving and affirming family. I have a podcast that people listen to. I, get to do public speaking and all of this stuff. Like, realistically, life is pretty freaking good for me as a trans person, right? And I used to get weird looks and stares and rude comments from people, and I don't anymore. And so that tells me that, generally speaking, when I'm out in public, I'm just read as a woman, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Now that my privilege is secure, now I get to move into non-binary town. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't.
Let's move on to the next struggle.
Yeah, like I don't want to do that. And it was literally like the thing that made me think that it was literally that someone used the pronoun they for me, and I was like, gosh, that's a fit. And I've even done it in my head. Like, I've said, okay, Callie is a he. Ooh, God, no, that's terrible. That feels awful. Okay, Callie is a she. All right, Callie is a they. Huh, that feels pretty comfortable too. And just like you said, like, I don't know why, but like, it just feels better being referred to in that way. And that was really the thing that sort of set it off in my head, because when it comes to the stereotypes thing, I mean, what it really could come down to is that I've just felt comfortable moving into all of the lesbian stereotypes, right? like I got flannel shirts, I've got jeggings on, and I like tea, and I have like a side shave haircut, and I don't wear makeup anymore, and I wear men's shoes. So like, cool, congrats, I'm like stereotypical butch lesbian now. And like, if that's the thing that's making me feel that way, that's bullshit. I can't, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that's what it is, at least not entirely. And in the other, like I was saying earlier, it also feels entirely valid to me to say, well, I'm not constantly freaking out over how uncomfortable I am in my body now. So like, it makes sense that I would move on to like, okay, what's really in your head, Callie? And it also makes sense to me that, when I came out and started this whole thing, non-binary identity, genderqueer, they, them pronouns, I mean, it was a footnote in literally everything that I read. So I didn't even really know that it was an option when I first came out. And it was like, well, this male box is entirely wrong for me. So of course I'm just going to move into the female box because that's how this works, right? Because I didn't know there were any other options. So it makes sense to me that I convinced myself that that was the right box. And then later on the line, after I feel comfortable there, at least mostly comfortable there, I find out like, oh yeah, there are people who identify, somewhere in between or not on the binary at all. And that's awesome. If that's where they are, cool. That's great. But that's not my experience. And because I had already previously convinced myself of where I was at, even if that may not have been it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I feel bad doing all this stuff because I'm like telling you you're not non-binary enough or whatever, which is a terrible thing.
This is the reason that I wanted to do this episode because I love you and I trust you and I know like this is your thing, right? So like this is not just an episode of the podcast. This is like two friends working some shit out here,
And like always, I don't have the answer for you, which is what always happens when people ask me for advice.
But that's fine. Like, because
I don't even know what being
other.
Non-binary is. And like
Right.
some people have told me that I'm not non-binary enough or whatever. And there are tons of people who get told that, especially.
Wait, how are you not non-binary enough?
I don't know.
I don't.
Because I'm too feminine. Look how feminine I am. So feminine.
Oh,
because
wow.
I like pink or something. I don't know.
Wow.
I have a few friends who were assigned female at birth who identify as non-binary, but they still use she, her pronouns, and they have long hair and wear dresses and all that stuff. And I don't feel comfortable like telling them you're not doing non-binary right, because that's not how non-binary works.
Right.
But then at the same time, I'm like, what's non-binary about you? I don't quite understand that either.
Right. Hashtag problematic thoughts with Ari and Callie.
Exactly.
Because you know what I mean? Like, because I mean, that's literally so much of this thought process for me has been like, I have these feelings. I think that's why I'm having these feelings. And holy shit, that's a really gross attitude to have. Like none of this should be based on gender stereotypes because I'm supposedly beyond that, right? Like,
yeah.
I've been doing a podcast
the enlightened
about
ones here on the Gatetheist Manifesto.
right. Like, I've literally been doing podcasting and activism around the fact that that's all bullshit for like 4 years now.
Yep.
I can't have a change in attitude based on those stereotypes. Speaking of true scum.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great story. Okay, so for those that not aware, true scum is a term that folks in the trans community use to describe people who are constantly telling other folks that they're not trans enough in one way or another.
Or they're not trans the right way or whatever.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And my primary experience with this has been, middle-aged or older white trans women who, have a very old-fashioned, outmoded, and just ridiculous idea of like, if you're a woman, this is what you are, right? It's like, if you're not wearing a floral shirt, a skirt, and shoulder pads, you're not a real woman. Like, it's like, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but like, weirdly,
shoulder
that's
pads
not
factor into somebody's idea of femininity. This is an interesting world we live in.
right. And like, obviously that was a bit of an exaggeration, but like you get what I'm saying. And so when I think of true scum, those are the people that I think of, the person who told me, because I didn't have the chance to shave before a support group meeting once, shave closer next time. Like, because I can't be valid as a trans person if I don't have time to shave. Like, thanks for stabbing the knife into like dysphoria center number 1 for me. I appreciate that. But so I don't want to get too into details because this wasn't a support group environment, but I posted in this trans support group that I'm a part of on Facebook, just like, hey, having some of these feels, not really sure where this is at, kind of talking through, what's going on here. And, anybody else have similar experiences? And one of the comments that I got back was that I should be careful talking about things like this because I don't want to give ammunition to people who hate us to, for them to further be convinced that we're just confused or that trans surgery regret is a real thing, which like that was out of left field because like I didn't even talk about surgery in the post except to say that like, maybe now that I'm post-surgery and comfortable in my body, I'm not focusing so much on that anymore. And I'm just like, oh my God, where do I start? Like, I don't even have to be coming out as non-binary to experience non-binary pushback. Like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. And like, I literally just have to be musing with thoughts that I may not be as entirely binary as I thought, which like, I mean, who is perfectly binary really? But I mean, and this turned into an argument, right? Like I'm supposed to censor my feelings, to kowtow to bigots. So we look more respectable in front of them. And I'm just like that's insulting to me as a person who's even like kind of sort of having these thoughts, let alone to people who are confident and comfortable in their non-binary identity. Like, so they're not allowed to talk about who they are because they're hurting you if they do. Like, who the fuck do you think you are? And like, obviously I know this stuff happens, right? Because my friends tell me about it and I see it. But, obviously experiencing that even in a small, like offhand way was just like, God, like I post about this in a support group, mind you. This was not in a support group, and it takes 10 minutes to get this back. Like, oh God, Ari, why is gender a thing?
Don't ask me.
Right.
I'm the last person to ask that question too.
So yeah, I don't know what to do with this. And it's just, I guess the important thing is that we can ask these questions, right?
Yeah, just asking questions. Devil's advocate.
Oh, don't know.
Yeah. No. It's okay to explore yourself in various different sexual and non-sexual ways.
So okay, so let me ask you this.
Okay.
And I know, you know, you've talked about this on other, and you may have talked about it when you were on the show the couple of times before I asked you to be a co-host. But like, I mean, is that literally what was like? Okay, yeah, non-binary is a thing for me. Like, you just know that like thinking of yourself in that way makes you feel better.
Yeah. I didn't know the term non-binary, which I prefer now, but at the time I was using the term genderqueer because that was the first term that I had heard. I didn't know what it was. I went online, looked for it, started reading, and it was really a matter of convincing myself that I was a valid part of that, I guess, if that makes sense, because I really strongly identified with it, but I was like, you know, maybe it's really not that bad. Maybe I'm just kind of a weirdo. I'm not really whatever this is. So I thought about it for like 2 or 3 weeks and just kind of was mulling it over thinking, you know, does this really fit me? And I came to the conclusion that yes, it does. And that was really it. I've never been really someone who's had a problem accepting my sexuality or my gender for whatever reason. I don't know what it is that makes some people struggle so much with it and others don't. But for myself, it was really not a huge deal. Like I wasn't freaking out like, oh my God, I have to figure this out. I was just like, oh, okay, this is the term that describes me. It totally makes sense.
God, I envy that. Well, we talked about that on your Queer Side interview, because you said, like, you know, you grew up in Texas in this like super small town where attitudes were not forward thinking, and you still were just like, oh, okay, cool, I'm bi, and then, you know, eventually pan, and then like.
I wish I knew what it was that made me like that, whereas other people struggle so badly with it. So then I could find a way to fix that for them.
Right. Well, and I think it gets back to, you know, this thing that I've talked about before, where it's like, it's really hard to tell the difference between, you know, who you really are and what your cultural programming is. Mm-hmm. And obviously on one level, that difference is important, right? But on the other hand, if that programming is so ingrained in you that you can't get away from it, does it really matter? Like, you know, is it culturally programmed into me that I'm supposed to like sex in a certain way, and that's why I like sex that way? You know, do I refuse myself that pleasure because, like, well, fuck gender stereotypes? You know what I mean? Like, who am I helping there? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not doing anybody any good by doing that. But at the same time, if we consistently make our decisions about, you know, what we call ourselves and who we are and how we act based on those kinds of stereotypes, then obviously, like, we're just perpetuating those systems, right? And that's kind of the odd place that I find myself in, because, you know, thinking back, like, you know, I had a lot of mucky bullshit to work through when it comes to gender, about what femininity is supposed to be, what womanhood is supposed to be. And am I finally shedding those expectations of myself and then, you know, appropriating the non-binary experience to describe that? Like, is that what I'm doing? Because that's fucking gross. Sorry, I don't want to do that.
I mean, that's the thing that non-binary people feel too. I think a lot of us feel pressure to appear androgynous and use they them pronouns and pick a neutral name, even if we wouldn't necessarily choose that, because, you know, the only other two options make us so uncomfortable that it's just like, you know, if I'm going to be read as non-binary, I got to tick all the non-binary boxes, which sucks because non-binary is supposed to not be a box.
Right.
But yeah, so we do kind of, suckily enough, like, police ourselves in that way. And sometimes we judge other people and police them like I was talking about before, friends who are assigned female at birth who still present femininely and use she, her, and keep their birth name and call themselves non-binary. I know and I'm sure lots of other non-binary people as well get a little twinge of like, what are you doing? Like, why are you calling yourself non-binary if you're not going to fit in the non-binary box? Get in there.
Right. And I mean, why do you think that is?
Oh, man. I mean, I think a lot of it is because, we're a minority within a minority. And so we get the hate from the cis people and we get the hate from some binary trans people too. And so we feel like we have to kind of set ourselves apart and be sure that we have our own little culture that the other people aren't involved in. So that way, a binary trans person or a cis person can't come up to you and be like, oh, well, you're really this gender. And be like, well, no, because look at all these non-binary things that I do, like wear Sperry's and have a short haircut. I'm not calling myself out at all right now. Or if you were assigned male at birth, there's other non-binary boxes, like you grow your hair out and you wear lipstick on occasion and dresses and that kind of thing. It's like it depends on what you were assigned at birth, like the appropriate way to be non-binary, which sucks because again, it's based on stereotypes of what genders are supposed to be and how we were raised. Like we were raised to think females are one way and males are the other way. So if you are assigned female and you want to make sure everyone knows you're not female, then you go in a certain way. And if you are assigned male, you want to make sure everyone knows you're not male, you go in the other way. But you don't go too far with it because then they think you're female, and that's also not good.
Right. And then you're hurting the cause by doing it wrong, and you're making the rest of us look bad.
Yeah.
And like, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have those thoughts. You know what I mean? Like, there's that meme that goes around that's like, the first thing you think is how you're programmed, and the second thing you think is who you really are. And like, if this podcast was the first thing I think, a lot of times, like, I would have been deplatformed and fucking shunned from the community years ago. You know what I mean? Because everybody has toxic bullshit to work through. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think I definitely had a sort of naive attitude getting into the atheist community, getting into my local trans community, that kind of stuff. Like, you get the idea that it's better here. Like, these people are past that kind of thing. And like, looking back on it now, obviously, like, my God, that was so naive and ridiculous of me to think, like, what the hell was I on? You know what I mean? But, we all have that bullshit to work through. And it sucks because so much of it is, we end up policing ourselves for bullshit things, because I hate to be this person, but I'm going to say it. Why do we need those labels?
Callie, no.
You know what I mean? I know.
You become anti-label.
But hang on. Here's the thing. It's one of those things where we obviously do need, because obviously, like, we need language to describe concepts, you know what I mean? But like, our society has created the need to have labels for those specific things, you know what I mean? And so like, we do need those things, but we shouldn't, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah.
And it sucks because in my mind, both sets of those feelings are equally valid and yet in conflict with one another. So it's like that eternal cognitive dissonance. This episode is going to be deeply unsatisfying for people because there's not going to be a resolution to this, right? Like,
I'm deciding for you. I'm going to flip a coin and that's going to tell us your gender.
Because that's what we do.
Yeah. You just got to pick one.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. I wanted to do this because to illustrate a couple of things. Okay. So I think sometimes I get the idea that people may peg me as a person who mostly has themselves figured out. And
people think the same thing about me, and I'm like, you don't know me at all.
Right. And I'm like, and to be honest, sometimes I feel like I do have myself mostly figured out. Like, I think the day that I think I have myself totally figured out is the day that I'm just completely wrong. Like, I don't think that'll ever happen completely. But there are days where I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. I'm doing okay. But there are plenty of times where I'm also just like, I'm working through the same bullshit everyone else is, and I have the same problematic thoughts everyone else does. I have the same doubts and all of that toxic stuff. And I think that's kind of an important thing to put out there because, like, Ari and I have a show where, we talk about this stuff, and, automatically when you do a podcast about something, you're sort of tacitly positioning yourself as somewhat of an authority on the topic, at least. Like, you're declaring, I'm a person who knows enough about this thing to talk about it, in front of an audience. And like, so that's like, I don't want to say it's putting yourself on a pedestal, like, you're declaring that you're the authority on everything and that you're awesome and you're perfect, you know what I mean? But there is a certain level of, okay, I've got this figured out enough that I feel like I can talk to other people about it. And I think it's important to note that, like, that's not a fixed position. Like, we all have those same doubts, and like, we've all got that bullshit to work through. And I think a lot of people are working through this stuff without the resources that I may have, or the resources that you may have, because we both have a lot of supportive people in our lives. At least now. I know you didn't at first, but you do now. And so I don't know. I think it could be helpful, hopefully, for people to just kind of hear us talking through this. Do you have any parting thoughts? Because I'm not sure that, like,
I have wisdom to impart upon the listeners and the Callie.
Do it, friend.
So I have, since being on the show for the last, it's been 2 years now. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think it's been 2 years.
I've gotten a lot of messages from people questioning their gender, not knowing whether they might be non-binary, not knowing whether they might be trans. And I can't obviously tell them whether they are or not. Unfortunately, there isn't a checklist like we want there to be. So what I try to tell people is, I know it feels uncomfortable not to have a label for yourself, because as humans, we like to label things, and we like to know that we fit and we belong in this little subculture. But sometimes it's okay to not be sure. And actually, it's always okay to not be sure. Like, you cannot know what your gender is for your entire life. You might not have the right label for it or know how to describe it to other people. But as long as you start making steps towards living in a way that makes you more comfortable, no matter what you want to call that, that's really the most important thing. And, I know people who have gone through drastic changes. Like, they've been very sure that their gender is one thing, and then later they either figure out that it was something else all along, or something about them just changes and they adapt to a new identity. And all of that is fine, because that's their experience. Nobody has to pick a box and stay in it, is what I try to tell people anyway. So, I think the most important thing is to start, if you are able to, living in a way that is reflective of your authentic self, and don't worry so much about what you want to call that authentic self. And a lot of times that'll just fall into place later. As you start, doing more things, you'll think, oh, okay, this actually feels very comfortable to me. Or, maybe I thought I was going to like this, but I don't really like it so much, and I'm actually more comfortable with this other thing. So again, to repeat myself, and to steal a page out of Callie's book just now, the labels are not as important.
Yeah, I tell people that often. Obviously, searching for a label is a thing that a lot of us do. And that's okay. That's not a thing necessarily to discourage. But what I always tell people is, find your place first, and then figure out what the label is that describes that place. Like, don't obsess over the right label, obsess over the right place. And then it'll be a little easier to find the word that describes that, or the label that describes that. So I think that's fantastic advice, Ari. Thank you for that, because I needed to hear it too.
Yeah. Or you can be like me. When I was first figuring out this stuff and going on the gender wiki and looking up every single type of non-binary identity that there was, and being like, I have to pick one. Which one am I? I don't do that anymore. But that was me at first.
And I think an important first step is just getting to the place where you can ask those questions honestly of yourself. The answers will come, at least some answers will come. Maybe you won't ever get all the answers, and that's okay. But I think the most important thing is just being able to get to a place where you can honestly ask yourself those questions. Am I this? Am I comfortable with this? Is this really who I am? That kind of stuff. And, feeling comfortable with asking those questions and asking those questions from an honest and authentic place. Like, I think that's a lot bigger of a step than a lot of people give themselves credit for getting
Yeah,
to. Yeah,
people a lot of times, I think, spend a lot of time worrying about whether their gender feels are valid. Like, am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I non-binary? Am I chicken gender? Whatever it might be. Because they feel like there are these pre-approved ways to experience gender. Like, those are their options that they have available. And you know, there might even be two people out there who experience gender in the exact same way, but they use different labels for themselves just because of whatever reason. I don't know whatever reason it might be. It's really hard to tell what's going on in someone else's head, so I don't have the answer to that. But it's important to realize that whatever you're feeling about your gender, no matter what you want to call it, or if you don't want to call it anything, it's valid because that's how you feel. And that's who you are as an individual. And nobody can tell you that you're not doing it right.
Sage words, my friend. The only way to do trans right is to not police how other people do it.
The only way to do trans right is to not be cis.
Yes. Oh, we're the best skeptics ever, Ari. We are the most logical, the most reasonable, and the best. I am a fan of this.
I am a fan of me.
I am too. Well, thank you for talking me through this. I think this is a valuable conversation, both for me and hopefully for some folks who will listen. So, I appreciate.
I learned nothing of value.
Your emotional labor. Well, no, you did teaching is what you did, and that's important, and that's valid.
Yeah.
Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. We are a proud member of the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative. We are a group of trans podcasting badasses working to bring more trans voices into podcasting and other content creation. Search for the Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook for more info. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. And Ari's got a thing?
You can friend me on Facebook, and in fact, you should do that, because if you don't, Antifa will take 1 foot from your favorite pair of shoes and hide it in a random closet where you know you would never put it because it doesn't make any sense, and you'll spend half an hour tomorrow morning with the one shoe that was in the normal place on your foot, and your other foot is just a sock, tearing the house apart until eventually you find it, and you'll be all like, what the fuck, how did it get in there? Didn't I already look in there like twice? Ugh, whatever. Also, you can email me at aristillman4@gmail.com, but be sure to only do so in incognito mode because Antifa will intercept it and find your email address and sign you up for a bunch of irrelevant mailing lists that you have no interest in, and no matter how many times you click unsubscribe, they just keep showing up. While I have your attention, I should also warn you not to listen to the SJW Circle Jerk. Oh yeah, you better believe Antifa is all over that one. When you download that show, they put a tracer on your smartphone or your computer to figure out your location, and then they change the information on the weather websites for your town so you think it's going to be warmer than it actually is, and you don't wear a thick enough coat, and then you're cold for a few minutes when you walk in between buildings, and all day you'll be thinking to yourself, why didn't I wear a warmer coat? I should have worn a warmer coat. I did not think ahead on that one, and now I'm cold. Those Antifa bastards. I'm also on another podcast called The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand, and you better listen to that one, or the Trans Tifa Super Soldiers will put a temporary tattoo of a vagina on top of your penis, and you will be really disoriented when you wake up and see that in the bathroom mirror, and you won't even be able to tell which gender you are until it washes off. So stay safe, everyone. Watch your back.
Oh, God. It's so good. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review. That helps us move up in the rankings and get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out.
Wait, Callie, I figured it out.
Oh.
They put a penis tattoo on top of your vagina, and that's why you're confused now. God damn it, Antifa. They won't rest until everyone's non-binary.
You broke me. Oh, Until next
Bye.
time, friends, this is the Gavious Manifesto.